General of the National Security Secretariat. Kanehara-san, great to see you. Hajime mashite, yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Then we have Jae-Seung Lee. Jae-Seung Lee, good friend, director of the Ilmin International Relations Institute, and quite appropriate for today, he's also director of the Jean Monnet EU Center of Excellence at Korea University. Terrific to have you. And then my friend Matthew Kroenig. Matthew, you've been getting a lot of airtime up here, but now it's China, so stay focused. Vice President and Senior Director of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. He also wrote, let's see, We Win, They Lose, Republican Foreign Policy in the New Cold War. Very provocative title. I hope we maintain that provocative edge. And then finally, Gabrielius Landsbergis, who needs no introduction, the former foreign minister of Lithuania. Great to have you up here. So we're going to start this session with a few comments. I'm going to kind of keep them limited, and I'm ruthless to 3 to 4 minutes. If you go over, you're going to get whacked. And we're going to have, I think, a very active discussion as well. And I want to sort of set the stage for a moment, because I think that we need to enter this question carefully. To a certain degree, this topic of China and what China is becoming and wants to do has been part of this entire conference. It's been referenced in almost every session I've gone to. So we're going to intensify and become a little denser in that coverage, but it's been something that has run through many of these conversations. I also want to put on the table that we need to have some degree of introspection about the Western role in China's rise. China was never supposed to be as successful as it is. Command economies run by the Chinese Central Committee Party were not supposed to be as successful as they have emerged. So part of this question today is understanding the dynamics of the success of illiberal market economies, because there's something beyond, what China's perhaps nefarious intentions in the world may be, of wanting to supplant the West, of wanting to take back Taiwan. It comes to a fundamental question of wiring of our society and whether democracy pays off and works for its citizens compared to others. And so I think there are a lot of issues to struggle through as we discuss these issues. But let me just start out. I'm not a linear guy, and so we're not going to start. I'm going to start with Jae-Seung Lee. I'm going to ask Jae-Seung yes, you're off the hook for a few minutes. Okay? But I want to start with you, Jae-Seung, and ask you to kind of give a few minutes of your oversight of this from Korea's perspective. But because you've shared some notes, I also want to kind of ask you and just press you for a moment to kind of pretend that you're the national security advisor to this room. Because I don't want you just to diagnose what the situation is today. Yeah. I'd like to know what the action plan is for dealing with China from your perspective, or should we all just, just kind of acquiesce to China's rise? Your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much. I was sitting in the second, so I thought that I was at least getting a few minutes.
You got to be prepared with me.
But well, you know what? The preparedness. Preparedness is actually, in a turbulent war, I would say a number one priority is preparedness to any sort of situation. Well, Korea is a neighboring country to China. Is China a friend or enemy? I would say it's not. Well, China is not a value-sharing country. So China may not be the value-sharing partner. But is China an enemy? China used to be number one trading partner with South Korea. Nowadays, it's number two. In recent years, it has declined a little bit. But I would point out the two main phenomena at this moment. Okay, unfortunately, the Korean domestic politics have been in a huge turmoil since.
A lot of fun.
A lot of fun. The Korea Korean life is so dramatic. A lot of things are happening. And mostly in the positive side. But this time, yes, we are indeed. During past 3 months, it's more than 3 months. It's like 5-6 months. Was in a huge turmoil, and we will have the presidential election in 3 weeks, in early June. So I would be cautious where Korea will go, but certainly there are uncertainties between the two major polarized the political direction. They are conservative and progressive. The current administration the previous, I would say, the current or previous administration was conservative. And conservatives were used to focus on Korea-US alliance, Korea-Japan-US partnership, and more, say, NATO plus IP4, so that kind of the alliance and partnership, the oriented. Progressives, on the other hand, used to focus a lot more on the continent side, which means more pro-China, or making balance between the U.S. and China. So that used to be the prototype. Well, usually a lot of policies will be made somewhere in the middle. Nowadays, we are not sure which side will continue the forthcoming the Korean government, and at the same time we have added a huge uncertain variable called the Trump 2 administration. Okay, so we can make certain a few forecasts, but what I can observe and what I can see in the Korean society, and also I guess that will be pretty same in many other allies and partners. The thing is, while the Donald Trump and Trump administration is pressing the allies and partners, we have to deal with it, and we have to reshape the proper wording with the new Trump administration as an ally, as a core ally. But at the same time, quietly, many people in policy circles are quietly tilting to China. Not for the affection, not because they love China, but if Korea has to, or some allies has to pay more to the United States, then they want some kind of strategic compensation. So they want, on the one hand, they may hedge with China, but on the other hand, they will seek the enhanced, a few steps further into China, might be a proper and fair strategic compensation. So that made the choice between the ally and the big neighboring country, maybe not such a reliable friend, but not an enemy, but big stakeholder in this region. And lastly, Korea still has to deal with North Korea. North Korean issue is no longer this Korean Peninsula issue. North Korea is currently fighting in the Kursk. Mm-hmm. And somehow, South Korea's been a major donor, contributor to Ukraine during the past few years. North Korea has provided, nowadays more than half of the ammunition Russians are using are North Korean. And North Korean soldiers are fighting in the war front. So somehow the two Koreas were somehow carried over. I would not say invited to here. So North Korea is a big winner so far in this game. China used to be the winner, I would say, but North Korea gained a lot. Okay, I'll wrap up. North Korea is gaining cash from Russia. It's gaining the huge war experience and strong backup, political backup, and even technology backup by Russia. So China is still North Korea's big ally. Nowadays, quite a bit disappointed by the Russo-North Korea partnership. They are not happy, but did not abandon North Korea. China keeps sending messages to South Korea, okay, we are open to engage with you. So forget about trilateral. Come with us. Korea will still be cautious, will still put an emphasis on the alliance side, but to deal with North Korea, we need some sort of productive,
right?
Yeah, kind of a dialogue process with China. So that's the dilemma. And Korea's choice, we are not like simply like shifting our position, but Korea has a lot more dilemma, and we do need creativity in dealing with the alliance on the one hand, and with having a strategic flexibility with China on the other hand. So for that dire question, we do need further discussion with European partners.
Jae-Seung, we'll be back to you, and we're going to get a lot of your perspective in this, and I want to thank you so much. But just to add a dimension, I used to be an MSNBC contributor, and one of those people who would show up anytime they called. One time was at 2 a.m., 2:30 a.m., report on President Trump in the first term's first trip to South Korea. I caught something that almost no one paid attention to, where he went on, he was speaking from a military base, south of Seoul, and said, look, I don't even know, his last line, he gave a perfectly, to come to Costanza's point, about the shape and form of what seems like an alliance should matter, but then something is quite different. The last line of his speech, he said, I don't even know why I'm here. This base isn't for our security, it's for your security. And if I had done the base, if I'd contracted the base, it would have been done cheaper and on time. And gave you a flash of how President Trump processed this question and essentially with one line undermined the entire reason his national security team wanted the trip, was to communicate the joined at the hip dimension of U.S. security to regional security. So I want to thank you for that and just add that little dimple to this.
Okay.
And now I want to come back to Kanehara-san. Kanehara-san, we have the U.S.-Japan Mutual Security Treaty, we have the Quad, we have, the increasing cooperation between Japan, Korea, the United States, et cetera, lots of architecture. But to come back again to Costanza's really interesting framing, in Japanese, as you know, because you speak Japanese, there's tatemae and honne. And the tatemae, the surface, the way things look, it looks as if American security is deeply invested in the region. The honne may be something different, and I'm interested in what you see it in. I'm going to just read a quote from you, where you said, what Japan has learned from the Ukraine war is that the era where we could rely entirely on the U.S. is over. And you said the U.S. will thoroughly counter threats that directly affect it, but it will back down at some point otherwise. Chinese President Xi Jinping is probably aware of that. I want to put that on the table because I want to challenge biases and assumptions that we have when we think about China and we think about America's place and our allies' place in this. Do you worry about Japan becoming the Israel of the Pacific in the sense that it will be ignored if Donald Trump does deals with other players? I keep putting on the table, Donald Trump may do a big deal tomorrow with China. Where will you be? So your thoughts.
Israel is very strong. But Israel and Japan cannot live without the United States. So we need American commitments. But we have to share their concern that the United States was 100% of world economy in 1945. Now they are only 25%. They have to prioritize, and that's where we are. And they say that the European Japanese are too dependent upon the American might, and the American might is shrinking. So we have to do more. And we have to take that challenge seriously. We have to do more. Prime Minister Abe just changed the constitutional interpretation. He said that we might be in the war from the outset. To join the war, join our forces to deter Chinese aggression over Taiwan. And Prime Minister Kishida promised to raise our defense budget up to GDP 2%. And if that's realized, our defense budget will be bigger than India and even Russia, number 3 big defense budgets. But although it is still a quarter of China, but we have to help Americans to make them committed in the region. That is our policy. I have to say one more thing. Abe-san said the free and open in the Pacific. This is the great message to the all over the world, because the West is shrinking. The West is the EU and the UK and the United States, Canada. Atlantic community is the world before. But after that, what happened is very good for the Asians. Colonial rule denied. Racial discrimination over. Communist bloc collapsed in Asia too. And the liberal order, and in particular free trade, gave them big chance. Now, ASEAN will be bigger than Japan in several years' time. India will surpass our size of economy maybe this year. Indonesia will be bigger than us in several years' time. And they are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And China has no idea to lead humanity. We do, right? And this liberal order, that is simply, we have rights to to express our opinion freely, and we can make rules simply because we are given talents by heaven, that is love, conscience. We can make the good order, good rules by free speeches, free debates, and government's legitimacy must be upon that, and that must be extended from Europe, from the United States to Indo-Pacific region. We must make this liberal order global. That was Abe's idea, and it became very popular. And we have to believe in our values, and we have to show them that our values will prevail, not Chinese dictatorship. And free trade gave big chance to China to rise, but they have to abide by rules. Huge subsidy to state-owned enterprises, intellectual rights thefts, and the domination of the minor states. Lithuania, when they invited Chinese trade office in Vilnius, the name of Lithuania was wiped out from the trade list of customs office. We cannot accept that. China is a great trade partner, but they have to abide by the free trade rules. But China does not listen to us these days because they are big enough. 10 years ago, China was Japan size. 20 years ago, China was very small. Now China is very big, and they are now taking wrong path. And they are not yet, like Putin, they have not yet used the military forces. We have to deter them. And they are peaking out. Their consumption is very weak. Their real estate business is very bad. And the tariff is biting upon the economy too.
Sure.
And Xi Jinping must know that. Several years ago, we were saying that by 2030, China's economy will be bigger than the United States. No longer. They're now peaking out. Their population is shrinking last year, and their birth ratio is 1.1,
right,
less than Japan. Korea is a bit problems, 0.74, but China is really shrinking. And we have to deter Chinese. Maybe we could put China up to the right path. Xi Jinping is a very unique leader. He's a petit Mao. He's not like Li Keqiang. If Li Keqiang is the leader of China, China is going to be very different. But Xi Jinping is now joining the Russians. They are stepping into Soviet shoes as a sort of communist leader. It's a very bad choice. But that's him. So we have this one-man dictatorship, like Putin, and we have to deter Chinese from attacking Taiwan. I could continue endlessly. So maybe
I will, in a friendly way, cut you off. But I will say, Kanehara-san, that we need to come back to this question of values you discussed, because again, inspired by the Lennart Meri lecture and challenge of that, is if America and Europe in the transatlantic relationship to some degree were the king of the hill of a values-based order, and now America is kicking down its own hill, who is going to be the defender and promulgator and continuance of those values, which you just said were so important? I think it's a really big question. Gabrielius, Landsbergis, I'm going to you next. I would love to, as I came in, I remember, I'm editor-at-large now of the National Interest, and Kishore Mahbubani in 1982 wrote his famous article in the National Interest called The West and the Rest, and began, thinking about a day where China and the rise of China and other nations in Asia with a different operating system, essentially, were going to challenge the Western order. And you can either argue that he was eventually right or wrong for many decades, and then finally, we're at this point where what Mahbubani put on the table is very, very important. And in my view, in looking back at the rise of China and the challenge, there was a lot of complicity of the West, a lot of complicity of Europe, a lot of complicity of Germany and the United States in the rise. Scholars that I really respect, like John Eikenberry, thought that the rise of China, the building up Chinese middle class, would eventually westernize it. Tom Friedman said they would eventually become like us because rearranging the global rules-based order would be too expensive and too hard, and so China, if anything, would become a defender and engaged with it. And I would just love to get, I know you are not, you're known as Europe's chief China hawk, so tell me where all of your colleagues went wrong.
Well, that's a heavy burden, to represent Europe, and especially being with a nickname that you proposed. I think that it's a wider concept than just relations between Europe and China. Basically, we deny the reality until the reality basically crashes upon us. Just take our relationship with Russia. We've been trading with Russia and supporting its military revival until the last day, even after the day it invaded Ukraine. It took a while. So basically, with the same speech, we would be saying, okay, the whole European security architecture is crumbling, and then we're continuing to pay money to Russia. So it's a denial of reality. Same goes with China, right? So we know all the things. We know the facts. We know that, and during the panel earlier, it was said that, 70% of Russia's industrial output is guaranteed by Chinese machinery. We know that. It's not a secret anymore. It's not just for the experts in the panel. The politicians do have that in their brief. That means, so I've tweeted that a while ago, that basically what we're doing is what, I hate to quote Lenin, but basically he said that, that the way that he's seen West is that the West is going to pay for the rope that the communists are going to hang us with. So in a way, we're exactly the same thing, right? So we are continuing to do the bad thing, knowingly that it's going to hurt us, where nothing can stop us until this reality just crashes upon us. So I'm not particularly an optimist as to where this is going. Actually, the things that have been happening through the last couple of months, provide even more darker colors, at least from my analysis. There is this theory about the reverse Kissinger that is happening. An attempt, and President Trump actually alluded to it in one of his interviews, that, maybe, it's possible to, bring Russia closer. But, what I'm seeing is really a different process that has been started. Basically, with a withdrawal of, perceived withdrawal of United States. Politically, who knows how far does it go from Europe? We see encroachment by China. And there are, real things happening. For example, there are ministers in Europe who have been waiting years so that they could call to Beijing and have a meeting set up. Now, after February, J.D. Vance's, speech in Munich, Wang Yi is calling the ministers and suggesting a meeting. So there is clearly a change into how China perceives Europe right now.
Saying, just to clarify, is they see Europe as low-hanging fruit of the moment.
Yeah. Basically, if anybody would, if we admit that the Kissinger moment is possible in 21st century right now, so who has a better shot at this? So I would say that it's not US to split Russia and China. It's actually China to use the opportunities. They wouldn't be able to split us, but they would use the opportunities that come out of this disruption caused by Donald Trump. We see more China in Europe. We see more active China in Europe. And what is even worse with what I started is actually we see European countries actually more receptive to the seduction of Chinese entrepreneurs, of a Chinese government, whatever they have to offer. And, you don't need to go very far. Just take a look at the European South, right? Where basically politicians are saying, for us to make a phone call to Washington, it's a very heavy task. Our phone calls are just not being received. While, you just make a call to Beijing and you're being received. So that is a problem. And to add to that, there is even more perverse chance. So now we're talking about this, the deal about Ukraine that could be achieved maybe after Donald Trump meets Vladimir Putin, who knows. And there has been a notion about the recognition of occupied territories, which is a horrible thing. That's a complete red line for everybody, Ukrainians and Europeans included. And what happens? China comes out and offers a better deal. They would say, well, basically, we accept everything. We would like killing to stop. Yeah, we're more closer to Russia, but we will never accept Crimea as a Russian territory. And it makes a better deal. And it gets Ukraine and Europeans in a crazy position where we know that they are supporting Russians in the war, but they're getting us a better deal. So my point is, right, that what this administration has started, this, it reminds me a bit of this technological disruption process. When you start a thing rolling and then, you create an iPhone and suddenly the whole, atmosphere, universe of apps explodes, right? So kind of you don't know what it will come up with later on. So this disruption started a lot of things. One of the things is that Europe is going to spend more in defense, but it's not going to spend in the United States, most probably. The second thing, you say that you are going to leave Europe, and then you suddenly see more China, which is your main adversary, actually becoming stronger with your partner that could have helped you or is supposed to help you in Indo-Pacific to bring more stability. So it's not good. It's not perfect.
I do very much appreciate your candor. And since most American children's fairy tales were really started in Europe and were ancient European fables, I'm always interested in when I hear about China, whether or not there's any memory here of the wolf in sheep's clothing, an understanding of what may be on the other side of some of those gestures. And I'll also say in this, which I hope we come back to in discussion, that right after 9/11, a few years after 9/11, Hu Jintao came to Washington, D.C., and I was set up in a meeting with some foreign ministry officials traveling with him, and one of them was the equivalent kind of the policy planning director at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China. So we had a small session. I finally asked him, I said, so will you please tell us what China's grand strategy in the world is? What are you trying to achieve? What are you going to do? And he says, well, we just need to sit back and do nothing because our main interest is how to keep America distracted in small Middle Eastern countries. That distraction of the U.S. during that period of time created overwhelming positives at that moment for China. I think it ruined it later, but it raises a lot of the questions that you got into. Matthew, now we're to you, and I just want to first kind of come at this question in a way, whereas if you were, and hopefully someday you will be advising the president, a president, maybe this president someday on what to do. I'd love to kind of get a sense, as you think about this, what the building blocks of a smarter strategy on China are. And also looking at the fact that particularly, I don't know the European numbers, but I know we've got $750 billion of bilateral trade. As I said, there's a lot of complicity in the empowerment and the enrichment of China in the United States. I also know, and I know that you know, that behind the scenes, a leading U.S. government official has been telling Europe, stay out of China, stay out of Asia, that's our deal, you guys just focus on Europe. So we'd love to get your response to this unnamed U.S. government official who's sending those signals, and maybe you can share with us what you know.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Steve. And I think I'd like to make 3 points. First, that China is the greatest threat the free world has ever faced, more capable than the Soviet Union ever was, more capable than Putin, and it is a comprehensive.
So that sounds like climate change and a tornado, or a bunch of tornadoes.
Well, Biden said the greatest threat was climate change, at times anyway. I think the Trump administration's been very clear that China's the greatest threat, and I think they're right about that, and is a comprehensive threat. It's economic, it's technological, it's values, it's military. I was in Taiwan 2 weeks ago. We have Taiwan's Deputy National Security Advisor in the audience. They would say, the attack is happening right now, daily military coercion, et cetera. But second, I think we can prevail for a number of reasons. You asked about democracy versus autocracy. I wrote a book about democracies versus autocracy and great power rivalry over the past 2,500 years, thanks. And we almost always come out on top. And if you just look at power, the United States, its allies in Europe and Asia, together we have more than half of global GDP. This axis of authoritarians, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, only 18% of global GDP. So I think we're well positioned. And then just final point I'd want to make, and to your question about this division within the administration of do we need Europe and Asia or not, I would say that one, Europe has a direct stake in how this plays out. If 21st century technology is dominated by a hostile autocratic power, that's not good for Europe, that's not good for values. If there's a major conflict in the Taiwan Strait between the world's 2 largest economies, that's not good for Europe. So Europe has a direct stake, and the United States needs Europe's help. When it comes to technological de-risking and the economic piece, we can't do that on our own, much stronger with Europe. When it comes to competing in multilateral institutions, to the human rights piece, Europe is a great ally. And I'd argue even when it comes to the military component, just statements from Europeans that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is important to them. selling arms to Taiwan or others is a way I think Europeans could help. And I do think these symbolic shows of force, freedom of navigation operations in the Indo-Pacific, help to send the message to China that this isn't just between you and Taiwan, this isn't just between you and the United States, it's between you and the free world. So to that unnamed official, I'd say I think that's not the right way to think about it. Not that we do Asia and Europe does Europe, but that the United States needs to lead as we take on this challenge together.
So let's have a little conversation, and we're going to open up to the audience in a few minutes. But I want to start with what Matthew said and just provoke something. And I'm not saying this is likely to happen, but I do remember sitting in a group it was an off-the-record secret meeting between leading Saudis and leading Israelis during Trump administration 1. And there was a lot of hubris and confidence in that room about President Trump's commitments both to Israel and redefining the region and Saudi Arabia. And I said, look, I think Donald Trump will do a deal with Iran on a dime. He'll turn quickly. The place got very tense, and no one believed that that would be possible. I think we're on the verge of the announcement of some sort of Iran framework, bypassing Israel to some degree in some of this. And I want to ask the same thing with regards to China. What if Donald Trump in his own parlance comes out and says, you know what? Taiwan makes a lot of semiconductors, but we really can build in our own. And they're kind of losers in their conflict with Beijing. Beijing's the winner. Beijing's rich. It's more powerful than Russia anyway. Couldn't you imagine a very big sea change in a short period of time, given the unpredictability of President Trump? And where would we be in that situation? Because I think that scenario is increasingly possible day by day. And if that scenario, as we're sitting with a lot of people in national security and intelligence, is increasingly possible day by day, what does that do to our mental map of how we think about security? And to come back to Constanza's point, is America in that situation, from each of your perspectives, more adversary than friend? Kanehara?
Yeah, and the system is the United States have bases in Japan. Without Japanese bases, they cannot fight in Asia. And we know that. This agreement, they defend us, we let them use our bases. And beyond Japan-US alliance, they have the U.S. ROK alliance,
right,
and some commitments in Taiwan, and they have the Philippines as an ally, right?
But I'm asking you, what if he decides not to fight China?
So this is a system. Yeah. Taiwan is in our sphere of influence.
Right.
If they attack Taiwan, the Americans they have domestic law to enable them to join in the war to help Taiwanese, and this is our understanding. This can be shaky.
Right.
So our response is we have to boost up our military capabilities to help Americans, to make them a bit assured that we are not totally dependent upon the United States. We can help you, and you can be assured that this is not an easy war for Xi Jinping.
Can you tie American hands in the Pacific by taking action that forces America because of the
U.S. is too big. Nobody can bind their hands, but we have to be able to say that we are standing by you. And if you do that, we are with you.
Right.
And this is the only way to deter Chinese.
Right.
And if you have cut a deal, then what can you get? The United States, we surrender 23 million free people to dictatorship, right? What did you get in response? Nothing. So I think this deal is not easy. This is big bargain deal. Right. But this is not politically possible.
Jae-Seung, I'd love to ask you the same question, and I loved how you framed Korea as having choices out there, depending. This can go door number A or door number B. Are you okay no matter what happens?
I'm not okay.
I mean,
I'm not okay, but everything can happen. Everything can happen, and well, at least tactically, Trump administration is quite unpredictable. So I would not be surprised if one day United States and China may sit in certain domain and we say, well, we will write a new chapter. We should be ready for that. I started my idea speech with the preparedness. So Korea should be prepared in any sense. And yes, we have to find not simply taking side, but just our answer in 2 points. First, in security terms, what matters is the credibility, especially in terms of alliance. And the Korea's biggest the threat and challenge is North Korea nuclear. weapon and North Korean the missile capabilities. So we do need extended deterrence. And so far at this moment, United States is the only player that could provide the extended deterrence. So in that sense, well, that one stays. That one stays. But, well, in economic terms or other kind of engagement, well, we will be ready for a number of scenarios, but we of course, we cannot deal with every situation, but at least in certain cases. But the key is how to handle with China. How to handle with China.
Right.
I would say the biggest, the core strategy to deal with China is having a leverage. If you show your weakness, then you will quickly lose the leverage. Well, China is quite the will not show the great mercy. China may show the welcoming at the beginning, but in the second and third round, well, don't expect the goodwill and mercy of China. You should have a leverage, and where the leverage is coming from. First, it is the economic. It's one, economic and military capability. Second, I would say this is the bigger one from the alliance, from the alliance and partnership. And that's why Korea nowadays is so eager to build. Not just nowadays, allies and partnerships are not given. We cannot take it for granted, but have to make it, have to find it, have to reassure it. So this is the moment of reshaping a lot of things in Europe, in Asia. So build a partnership. The more partnership we will have more leverage with China. China knows it. So keep sending message that don't make a lot of the
right. But let me just ask you a quick question, double down, and then I want to jump to Gabrielius and Matt. Is, you know, as we saw in the tensions, in the trade tensions between the Trump administration and China, giant tariffs went up. China met our tariffs and went further with some other blocks, particularly with rare earth export suspensions, which they have now reversed temporarily, you know, depending on how things go. Both countries are putting a knife to each other's throat. What happens when that happens? Usually, and we have a little, downsizing of the the tensions. Is I'm just wondering at the end if, despite all this drama, all these things happen, and whether there actually is anything at the end of the day that changes between the two governments, and their trading and economic profiles, despite all this drama of this moment. Because it seems like the markets are rewarding a suspension of the hard brinksmanship as opposed to having confidence in this going. So what are your very quick thoughts?
What matters is a fundamental. Okay, well, the tariff, well, this is kind of very big storm, but the storm may not 365 days, which means...
Was Korea happy with the tariffs it got from us?
No, this is not happy. Of course, not happy. But, at the same time, I do not think that this kind of tariff system will last for the rest of 4 years. Well, probably the U.S., the partners will know a lot better. But well, there will be a series of negotiations. We will find some way to deal with it. But what matters in the end is actual fundamental and of the economy. What the competitiveness in either manufacturing or any sort of the economic capability and resilience. And what I think that will ultimately tell the terms, and the more resilience will lead to the better strategy in the end.
Thank you, Gabrielius. I should tell everybody, if you're still a member of X or Twitter, which I am, I happen to love it. Subscribe to his Twitter. It's very puckish and interesting. And you've got, I love this tweet that you had. You said, if I had a nickel for every time a Chinese ship was dragging its anchor on the bottom of the Baltic Sea in the vicinity of important cables, I would have 2 nickels, which isn't much, but it's weird that it happened twice. So, it's a great tweet. I mean, it should be on your gravestone or something, I don't know. But I do want to come at this kind of question on resolve. And again, if I think, coming back to Costanza's point, we see a widening, a distancing from the US with Europe. And you also have lots of problems inside of Europe figuring out what Europe wants to do and is. And I love your cynicism because it's realistic and you should publish in the national interest where cynicism thrives. But I'm interested in this kind of question of when you look at this growing, this growing challenge of China, is there a moment where there's a Suez crisis moment that the world shifts, understanding that it's not America driving the definitive change in the world anymore? It is other powers. It may be China. It may be an amalgam of powers. Is there a Suez crisis moment out there that you think is lurking?
Yeah, clearly there is one, and it's Taiwan. I think that we don't recognize the potential impact to the world. What would it mean for Taiwan itself, for the region, and for everybody who has a stake in global trade or global technologies or whatever, or values-based stake, so that we want democracies to thrive. So that's an enormous challenge, and I would like, I had a kind of an idea for your first question, like, is it possible that there would be a deal there? And I think that it is possible, because what China has been doing now with tariffs, they want to show the world and Europe and United States they can withhold longer than the Americans. They can take more pain than any of us can do, and if they can hold on for longer, because the pain is real, right? The prices are rising, the economy is not doing so well, the stock market is not doing so well, and so who will outlast whom? And imagine, I mean, it's quite easy to imagine the situation where China, okay, so you're in pain, we're in pain, but we offer you not a tariff deal, but we offer you a fundamental deal that will solve all our problems and your problems. And not just 4 years term, but let's talk 20 years. Let's talk, I don't know, 2049, whatever. Where do we see each other in that time? And when I see the current Trump's administration, I would not exclude that they would say, okay, that's interesting. A fundamental deal on everything, and then the world collapses.
Right. Matthew, before we go to the audience, just give you an opportunity to help shape things. As we open this, I think one of the big challenges out there is this more than about Taiwan, which I think is in a geographically complicated place. I think it's easy for me to go to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and meet Americans that have no idea. They don't understand why we're involved in Ukraine, and Taiwan just seems a lot further away in many ways. That a lot of the strategic class in D.C. and the assumption that Taiwan's defense and security really matters to the fundamental security of the United States and its allies is not shared by many Americans who look at the fact that these international commitments that America has are undermining their interests. And I'm just interested in the question of, what do we do with that from your perspective? What do we need to do to reset the deal with Americans so they understand why these issues we're discussing are important? And secondly, if we don't do that, what is the risk to democracy, to come to where Costanza finished, the risk of democracy of seeing a rising power that became an illiberal success in the world, not having to care about its citizens, in fact, subordinating the interests of its citizens to power within its structure to a limited few. So just take us there, and then I want to open to the audience.
Well, I do think America's leaders could have done a better job over the past 25 years of explaining why they benefit from an engaged United States. Over the 18 years or so we were in Afghanistan, how often did a U.S. president give a primetime address about why it matters? Even in the war in Ukraine.
Not much.
After Bush, I can't think of any. War in Ukraine, Biden took 1.5 years to make the case to the American people about why Ukraine mattered, and he kind of mixed it also with what was happening in Gaza. It was confused. So I think we need to do a better job. But when
he said because we're making armaments in Phoenix.
It was one of the arguments he made, that you benefit. But I do think on China we're in a better place, and with all due respect to you and the distinguished colleagues, I think this hypothetical is a little bit unrealistic. So if you just look at the public opinion, if you ask the American people what's the greatest threat, China comes in higher among Republicans. A lot of divisions within the Republican camp, within the Trump administration, but an agreement that China is the greatest threat. Pentagon released a new interim defense strategy that says China is the #1 priority, $1 trillion defense budget, largest in history. Rubio's first meetings were with the Quad foreign ministers minutes after the inauguration. Hegseth's first major international trip was to Asia, where he talked about the importance of Indo-Pacific partners. And the biggest tariffs, both threatened and still in place, are against China. So I think we've had a policy.
So what you're saying is we can have strategic rationality in Asia and strategic irrationality in Europe, right?
Well, I just came off a panel on Trump's Ukraine policy. I think there's a little bit of an overreaction in Europe on transatlantic policy too, but that's for a different panel. But so on some kind of fundamental deal, I could see the Trump administration having interest in a trade deal with China. They did have a trade deal in the first term. But I don't think that gets in the way of the broader strategic competition and doing what we need to do on the security and military side and on the economic and technological de-risking side.
Great comments, and I actually agree with you, but my job is to provoke a scenario. Let's open up. We've got so many. Let's go to my friend in the second, right here. And I'm doing this because I sat next to him at dinner a couple of Lennart Meris ago.
Peter Semneby from the Swedish Foreign Ministry. I'm currently Swedish Special Envoy on the Korean Peninsula, and part of the reason why this job exists at all is that Sweden represents American interests in North Korea since 30 years ago. I would like the panelists to, I think it's fair to say that sooner or later President Trump will want to return to the Korea file, the North Korea file. With the possibility of shaking up some security relationships in East Asia. And I would like the panelists to talk about what you see as opportunities, risks, fears, and so on, and what you think the American administration should do.
Right. Can we? I mean, just Matt, real short form. Can we return to the love letters?
My view is that Trump had high hopes for some kind of deal with Kim Jong-un in the first term. We had these 2 big summits, and then it turned out to be more difficult than he thought, and he kind of lost interest and put it on the back burner. So I don't know. We haven't heard him talk about it on the campaign trail. We haven't heard his senior officials talk much about it.
But he's right. It's coming back.
I don't know. My best guess is that they put it on the back burner because they think it's too hard and focus on things where they think they can make a difference.
Kanehara, short comments?
Well, the last Hanoi meeting ended up in a bad, quite bad manner, without any successful outcome. So Trump would not make the same mistake. Well, if it happens,
he doesn't see it as a mistake, though.
He didn't care probably, but the thing is, well, in any kind of the summit or in any kind of serious relation, if you make 2 consecutive mistakes, then that is a failure. So not just studying the dialogue or negotiation, but this time United States should set the right target. What would be the outcome? What would be the expected outcome at this moment? That would be correct.
Kanehara-san?
Well, North Korea is sending troops to Ukraine and ammunition killing Ukrainians every day. And Mr. Trump goes to Pyongyang and kisses Kim Jong. I can't believe it.
Thank you. Let me gather a few. There's so many names. Let me go right here in the second row, then to Angela Stant, and we're going to Richard over here. So, yes. And then Anders. Yeah.
Yes. So
and remind people who you are, by the way.
Yes, of course. My name's Bobo Low. I'm an independent international relations analyst. My question is really to Kanehara-san and Jae-Seung.
Right.
When people talk about the Sino-Russian partnership, they tend to use sort of big abstractions like axis of evil, axis of upheaval, axis of authoritarians, and so on and so forth. But I'm actually more interested in how you see the Sino-Russian partnership impacting on specific South Korean and Japanese security and economic interests in Northeast Asia. So, for example, with Japan, it's a situation with the Senkaku Islands. With Korea, it's, how do you influence Pyongyang?
Got it. Thank you. Let's go to Akita-san, great, you're there. We'll just go to we'll get all 5 here, okay? Akita-san, go ahead.
Fine. Okay.
Which one? Okay, then to Angela, and then back to Akita and Anders and Richard.
So that we can be more efficient.
Tell them who you are, Angela.
Angela Stone from Brookings. And my question again is to Mr. Lee and to Mr. Kanehara. And
Can you please include Matthew?
Right,
I'll comment anyway.
It follows exactly on from what Bobolo was saying. So in the past few years, joint Chinese-Russian air and sea patrols have harassed South Korean and Japanese airspace, have violated their territorial waters. So it's really part of the same question. How much of a military threat do you see the increasingly close military cooperation between Russia and China?
And why aren't you shooting them down? Okay, Akita-san.
Okay, thank you. Hiro Akita, Nikkei from Tokyo. So my question is about the long-term prescription to deal with the China's threat. If China is a hurricane, maybe building a wall and avoid the full-scale invasion to Taiwan is okay. It's the end of the threat. But if we define China as a climate change, China will try to change the ecosystem in which we are living, so change the rule and norms, our way of thinking, everything. And so what is a prescription to deal with this climate change caused by China? It's much more difficult than defending Taiwan and so on.
Terrific question. Anders, right behind you. Give it to Anders.
Anders Åslund, Washington. I have a question for Matthew.
Great.
I'll start with you, Steve.
Gabrielius will get to you soon.
Okay.
You said that Trump is unpredictable, and then you made an eminent prediction showing that he's not unpredictable. I would say that Trump is extremely predictable. In foreign policy, he has 2 objectives. The first is making money for his family, and the second is vanity.
I didn't hear the second one.
Vanity.
Vanity.
So where would he go if he wants to make money for the family?
China.
Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia. And next to China. And then who has stood up to Trump? Only China. What happens? Trump makes his first agreement with China. So clearly this is the way to deal with Trump, and China has shown that this is how it should done.
Right.
And remember that Trump made an exception for the telecommunication company ZTE during his first period. So, and we don't know why. And now some Chinese company, unknown to everybody, has paid $300 million for meme coins of Trump.
Right.
So the Chinese clearly know how to handle Trump. So that's what I want to ask.
Right here. And then I'll move over to all of you, I promise.
Charles Garner from the Centre for European Reform in London. I'd like to suggest that it'll be very hard to get the Europeans and the Americans to cooperate closely on China, because it's a fundamentally different approach they take. Americans are concerned about Chinese power per se. Europeans are concerned about Chinese behavior. If China behaved better, stop giving so many guns to Russia, stop bullying its neighbors and so on, and stop cheating on IP, then Europeans quite happily get quite close to China. The Chinese have a...
And can I ask you real quick, Charles, is there a difference between Europe writ large and what the UK's?
Not at the moment, no, because the Keir Starmer's government is quite European on China. It wants to engage with China. Europe as a whole is twice as dependent on trade with China as the US is. It's about 5% of GDP, not 2.5% of GDP. So Europeans want to trade with China. They want to do stuff with China. The Chinese want to grab the Europeans and pull them away from the Americans. Trump's making that job a little bit easier now, because the Chinese can say, look, we agree on trade issues, we agree on climate change. And some Europeans are flirting with the Chinese at quite a senior level.
Right.
Don't think they'll get very far in the long run, because the two big problems which prevent too many Europeans flirting with the Chinese are, firstly, Chinese support for Russia. Secondly, China dumping lots of green goods on world markets and the huge trade deficit they have with the EU. So I don't think they'll get very far, but some Europeans will make an effort to flirt with China.
Right, thank you. Hey, guys. We've got a lot of questions out there, and these are interesting as well. Could I'm keeping track. Would it be okay if I took a few more and then we, did a thing? So I want to both. So let's go. Well, these 2 guys over here, and then the middle. Okay, I want to go to the far wings over here, and just be as succinct as possible.
I'll try to.
You will, because I'll cut you off.
Bart Hoogweem, Australian Strategic Policy Institute. A couple of years back, we worked on economic coercion by China.
Right.
I think that window to talk about economic coercion by China seems to have closed.
Okay.
Now, the Japanese and Korean foreign ministers met with the...
I got to ask for questions because
Yep.
I got 10 other questions out here.
So what is still the appetite amongst non-US partners to work on China's economic coercion? And what's the signaling at the moment from Japan and Korea towards the Quad and the partners of the free and open Indo-Pacific?
Terrific. Can you hand to your neighbor?
Kaimo Kuusk, Ministry of Defense, State Secretary, Estonia. Question, North Korea is in Kursk. What holds back Korea to give military aid for Ukraine? Humanitarian aid, what Korea has given to Ukraine has been rather modest.
Terrific. And we have these folks in the middle here. Let's go to them. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Tom O'Donnell. I do energy and geopolitics. I'm American. But I work in Berlin. And my question is for Gabrielius.
Thank you. Finally, I've been waiting. Have 30 seconds more.
What am I supposed to? And they tell you that. Anyway, the problem I see, you're talking about the connections with China in Europe.
Yes.
And the problem is, I talk to all these German small businesses, everybody. There's no other way they can be competitive in their business if they don't buy boards from China, if they don't buy this and that from China. And they really don't know what to do. They don't necessarily like it. And maybe we could talk a little bit about on this level of things.
Right.
What you think.
Great question. This gentleman here, and with you in the back.
Yep. My name is Wallace, graduate student from the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. So my question is mainly to Kanehara-san. And you mentioned about the balancing between China and also other allies. So my question is to not losing the Chinese market. So actually, where is our red line and principles? How many compromise we can make actually to China? Thank you.
Thank you. And can you hand to the gentleman just behind you? Do I have folks over here?
Hi, my name is Siddharth Vardarajan. I'm editor of the Wire publication in Delhi. I'm wondering if you gentlemen followed the
publication, by the way.
Followed the recent skirmish between India and Pakistan.
Yes.
And in particular, the news that perhaps a J-10 Chinese fighter using a PL-15 may have shot down a Rafale. Have you any concerns about the quality of Chinese weaponry and how that may actually undo some of the plans and thinking?
On the high quality of Chinese weaponry. Okay, great. Let's go to Prince Turkey, and then we'll close it out. Prince Turkey, good to see you.
Good to see you, Steve. 2 points. One is the democratic systems that you have are, by the nature of them, very short-sighted because of the electoral processes that you have to go through. And in many cases, they also act as a yo-yo in which political parties differ on policy and implications and applications of policy. So how is that to be resolved when you have on the other side, on the Chinese side, for example, long-term planning, long-term view of what is to be expected and what to expect not only from themselves, but what they can get from others? That's one question. The other question, of course, is this rule-based order that everybody is talking about is most abrogated by the promoters of the rule-based order.
Right.
Whether it is the United States or Europe or other countries like that. So how is that to reconcile for a country like Saudi Arabia to do business with all of you and that on those terms? Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we've got a fantastic lineup of questions. Just to remind you of the early ones, about the Sino-Russian partnership. What is real, what's not? How does this affect Japan and Korea's interests? Angela Stent looking at how are you specifically thinking about the military dimensions of that threat. I think we had from question also about China in how to deal with the climate change dimensions of it from Akita-san, looking at, is there a strategy? And when you add to that the Belt and Road Initiative and the other thing, as best I can tell, the United States just walked away from what it was going to be its response, and its chief partner was Japan, in looking at how it creates a major global, alternative, seems to have been wrapped up. Anders, in kind of looking at the predictability of Trump versus the unpredictability and, these issues and sort of how to deal with other drivers of Donald Trump's decisions. Charles Grant asked a very interesting question about the EU's much more substantial dependence on China, and doesn't that create some dynamics that need to be thought through? We have questions on competitiveness. You guys all listen to this on North Korea, and why isn't Korea itself doing more with regards to Ukraine? You are a technological supergiant in the world. Why aren't you using many of your capacities with regards to some of these defining conflicts of the time? Question on balancing China and allies. What are the red lines and principles? India, Pakistan, are we worried about the increasing performance, if you will, of Chinese weaponry, et cetera? And Prince Turkey asking an interesting question that I think Chinese might actually say is, aren't our elections and isn't democracy getting in the way of our efficacy as a counterbalancing force in China? There are others about the rules-based order, et cetera. So I want to give each of you an opportunity to answer what you would like. This time I'm going to start with Gabrielius.
I'd start from the notion about Europe, where European intention of working with China comes from. So basically, I've covered that a little bit at the beginning, that it's quite natural, right? We see good business opportunities. We don't care about the risk that much because we consider them not affecting us directly, and therefore we engage. There is a balancing factor, and it comes from transatlantic relationship. Basically, especially the eastern flank countries, they do tend to have in their back view mirror the interests of the United States. Because United States, the biggest leverage that United States has on Europe is security.
Right.
There is no greater commitment that we have between the two sides of the Atlantic. And now the problem is that if this is shifting, if the commitment is shifting, changing, transforming, whatever, call it whatever, I mean, it removes the leverage, this transatlantic element, from why we shouldn't engage with China. If United States doesn't care, why should we care? Basically, to sum it up. Therefore, I mean, I think it's wise to pass the message on to our American friends that there is this element, so combination of two could work. Now, economic coercion, honestly, it was mentioned here that Lithuania was on the forefront when it came to Chinese coercion in Europe. It forced Europe to create an anti-coercion mechanism. So we have elements of that. Whether that would be used against China, well, it's difficult for me to tell. I would predict that rather not, because it's called a nuclear button, economic nuclear, trade nuclear button that Europe possesses, but at least we have it. I don't think that we've fully understand the risks that we have, that our dependency has built on China. Lithuania's case very clearly shows how far can it go. And I'm absolutely convinced that we have not been the last case in this.
Can you just give a little bit to this gentleman's question? I think it was really interesting about smaller companies, entrepreneurs, because I know Lithuania made a decision to embrace, at an unofficial level, Taiwan economically much more. Are you paying a price for that? And I have to tell you, I just sort of go around the world, Africa, Latin America. I see Chinese deals happening everywhere. I just see them on the ground, on the road, cutting deals. I wonder where their American counterparts are. And many of you may come tell me later that we're there too, but I just sort of feel, to what this gentleman said, they're out in the nitty-gritty, in the hitting the pavement, doing these deals.
Couple of points on this. So first of all, when it comes to national security objects, any investment in national security, right, what we consider our national security area. So it's ports, airports, customs.
You have a screen.
Yeah, we have a screen, and so no Russian, no Chinese investment for more than a decade now. What happened was, though, so when China deleted us from the customs systems, right, we were not able to export it in 2021. Basically, all of our economic trade ties with China stopped.
I see.
Immediately, nothing has happened. Now it returned. So now we're back in business. But when we were deleted with China, yeah, I mean, because they need some stuff from Lithuania, so basically they are not telling anyone, but basically they removed that. But when they deleted us from the customs systems, we've appeared on the radar in so many other countries.
Right.
So Japan, South Korea, Australia, Taiwan, so we have started to see a rise in our trade with the countries in the region.
Thank you. Matthew, I'd love you to take whatever you'd like, but you've got to include Prince Turkey's question on whether elections are a problem.
Yes. I did want to come to that one, because I think you're right that the conventional wisdom is that autocracies plan for the long term, democracies are short-sighted. I think empirically that's not true, and it was a theme of my 2020 book. Yes, autocracies set a lot of 10-year plans, but they don't follow them, because the dictators are unconstrained, they change their mind and back again. Democracies, because they are more constrained, tend to stay on a steadier course, and I would argue that building and defending the rules-based international system was the best grand strategy in the history of humankind.
I would love to host a salon dinner between the two of you tonight, debating this point.
If you're paying, I'm there.
Okay.
Yeah. I also want to challenge the premise of this question. I think the United States also cares about China's behavior. And in fact, the United States did more than any other country to increase China's power over the past 25 years because we thought it would lead to good behavior. We thought they'd become democratic, cooperative, and so on. When it was clear it was leading to worse behavior, that's when we changed. And so it's really hard to imagine, but if China suddenly became democratic, cooperated, had free and fair trade policies, stopped threatening its neighbors, I suspect U.S. policy would change. So I think we're both reacting to the behavior. You suggested essentially that Trump could go soft on China, but I would remind everyone that he was the one who ushered in the era of great power competition with China in 2017 at a time when I think the establishment position was that that was kind of crazy. Looking back, I think he was right. And then finally, what is the strategy to deal with and I do think it is a more systemic challenge. And so this was the theme in my last book, We Win, They Lose. But essentially the problem is that China has both the capability and the intent to threaten our vital interests. And so I think success is getting to a place where either they lack the capability or the intent to threaten our vital interests. And I think there are a couple of ways we could get there. One would be is that we so thoroughly outcompete China that they don't, and protect ourselves, that they don't really have the ability to harm us that much, even if the hostile intent remains. Or that we get them to change their minds. Kind of like Gorbachev, they said, you know what, this was too hard, too difficult, too costly for Beijing. We're better off cooperating with the United States and its allies than trying to challenge it. And I think those things are linked. The more we outcompete them, I think the more likely it is that they change their mind.
Before I leave you, Matthew, just to come back to Angela's point, you and I are friends. We don't share the same worldview all the time, but it's interesting that you are someone who sort of thinks there is value in power to have an eruption of kinetic conflict and, the assertion of power. And I've always argued that every presidency needs to find a small country to bomb. It turns out that was Yemen for Donald Trump. But also in alliances, is it time, just from your perspective, for Japan or for Korea to shoot down some of those planes that are infringing on airspace?
Interesting. Well, or Taiwan, which is facing daily military incursions.
You would be in favor of that?
Well, I believe in peace through strength, like Donald Trump. So I think much better would be to build up our capabilities in the Indo-Pacific to a point where Xi Jinping wakes up every day and says, today's not the day to invade Taiwan and maintain peace and stability in that way.
Okay, great. Thank you. I would love to ask your take. Yes.
All right.
And why aren't you helping Ukraine?
Okay. Well, that one first. See the number. Follow the statistics. Korea have provided substantial amount of financial aid and military aid. Here, military aid include both non-lethal weapon. Okay, in the world we need in the warfare we need a lot of weaponaries. Some are ammunition, some are non-lethal weaponaries, but which are essential in continuing the war. Okay, so Korea was a major contributor of that sense. Okay, ammunition side, is Ukraine or the NATO would be in a serious shortage of ammunition, then Korea would have been invited to provide supply those the ammunition and or specific the weapon side. Well, there is an issue of operability issues, and also there was not such a huge ammunition shortage. Russia was different, right. And Russia relied heavily on North Korea and the ammunition side. Instead, and also what you have to look at is Korea did contribute a lot to the European defense. If we follow the statistics in Poland, Romania, Baltic countries, Korea provided a huge number of K9, K2, FA-50, and a series of defense weaponry. Korea is good at providing those defense weaponry. So, why not a lethal weapon supply to Ukraine? That is a very too narrow question. And if I add just my personal, it's very personal opinion, but North Korean soldiers are fighting in Kursk with North Korean ammunition. Okay, why not South Korea? Okay, well, you're your enemy, so you provide the South Korean weapon and kill North Korean. Okay, North Korea somehow happened to be our enemy side.
You need to finish in 30 seconds.
Yep, but we still think North Korea as Korean.
Right.
And they are not anybody. They are not anybody. So in that sense, I don't think that, if there was other choice, if there was no choice, then it might be the different issues. But we will try our best to defend freedom, provide the European security and global security while keeping
Jae-Seung,
our unification goals.
If I ask you real quick, really fast response. We have suspended joint military exercises in the region with Korea, which is there, from your perspective, does that make you a softer target? To come back to what Angela Stant and this gentleman were asking. Right.
Actually, stopping joint exercise is not a bad idea. But I will combine these two questions. Climate change. Thanks for that question. I'm an energy specialist.
Yeah, go fast.
Fast. 3 response to climate change. First, mitigation. Second, adaptation. Third, global region-based response. Exactly the same wording will be applied to the Chinese side. Mitigate the threat, adaptate the situation, and build the regime.
Terrific. Kanehara-san, I'm going to give you the last word here today to respond to what you would like, but I also want to recognize you helped build Japan's brain, if you were to call it that, in the national security space with Prime Minister Abe. I've always been interested in watching Japan turn on the switch and off the switch of sort of awareness on national security issues, whether it just followed by routine what America was having it do, or whether it began to look at its own interests given what was going on in the region. And I think you've been part of that latter ability to begin to look at it. So as you respond to these questions, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your own predictions about Japan's role in the world as a more proactive national security force as opposed to one that's just following its former leader.
I need 20 minutes.
Yeah. You have 3.
The Abe also, these combinations changed our national security policy forever. We had Kishi, we had Yoshida Kishi, that they pushed Japan into the West.
Right.
We had somehow neutral mood inside Japan. And Nagasone came in after Afghan invasion by Russians.
Sure.
He stood with Reagan, right? Then we went back somehow. Lukewarm situation there, right? And then Koizumi sent our 5 warships to help Americans in Afghan war in Indian Ocean, and then we went back again. But this time we don't change simply because of the rise of China. Soviet's war was NATO's war. We're not very much worried about it. China came to us after 1972. We didn't worry about very much. North Korea is very weak. Their nuclear weapons are scary for us, but they can't attack us without missiles. Right? First time that we are facing Taiwan issue, this is real. If Taiwan war starts, we got involved instantly. Now we are very serious, and people support the governments. They build up the military forces. Sino-Russian relationship. China was on our side to face Russians up to 1991. After that, China erased the border disputes. They simply removed the threat from the north. They turned to us, but they were with us. But after Lehman shock, they started to challenge us. They thought China would be stronger than the West. They can shape their world, their own world, in particular in Asia. And they started to be the challenger to the status quo in Asia, changing the borders and these things. We have to be careful about China. Russia was not very much big threat to us up to 2014. Ukraine was a big shock for us. And then after 2020, we have to say bye-bye Putin because you broke the law. And Putin says Ukraine is mine. Ukraine was mine. I take it by force. And people there are my properties. Xi Jinping is saying the same thing. Taiwan is mine, was mine. I take it by force. Taiwanese are my properties. We cannot accept it. So we have to face that. That's the reason why we are now going to the sort of the military build-up course that we have to do that. And I have to mention India. The West used Stalin to finish Hitler, and the West used Mao to face Russians. And now they are approaching each other because they are just like New York, two families facing New York police departments. It's the sort of the manageable convenience. Because of the United States, they have to be closer.
Right.
Now we have to take India on our side. When we normalized relationship with China in 1972, we kicked India to Russia. We didn't realize that, but they went to Russia. They're weeping because they are democracy. We kissed the cheek of Mao, the dictator. Now we have to take back India now. We have to take India on our side. That is the last superpower.
Huge priority.
Yeah, and that's the reason why we talk about the Indo-Pacific, not only Pacific.
Well, listen, we're at time. Before we give a round of applause, I just also want to give you a round of applause to the people who write these wonderful little missives and these titles. They're the best of any conference I've been to in the world. And this Ben Franklin quote, "Look before, you'll find yourself behind," I think is very appropriate to these chances. Do you want to throw something else?
Steve, can I answer to your question?
Oh, God.
Why don't we shoot down the Chinese planes?
Why don't we shoot down the Chinese planes? Because it might...
Americans always say, don't shoot in the first place.
You know, I believe that a little bit of kinetic force is occasionally useful. And so one time I will on stage agree with Matt Kroenig that sometimes otherwise you turn into, I think we've had a lot of discussions of red lines. We've had a lot of discussions of the questions of intent. I believe in the Tatemae and Honnei distinction in Japan that, you know, things can look something on the surface, but unless you're willing to pound it out, you know, in the reality, I think sometimes, you know, you're going to send signals where, like we did in 2014 with the Russia invasion of Ukraine then, nothing happened, you know, to a substantial degree. So I think these lines matter. So with that, I just want to ask for a big round of applause for Nobukatsu Kanehara, Jae-Seung Lee, Matthew Kroenig, and Gabrielius Landsbergis. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you.